If you're new to mixing or you're not yet confident in your ability to get great mixes every time, this video is for you. Everybody starts at the beginning, but some people get stuck there, and I don't want you to get stuck. So today I'm sharing 5 mistakes that keep rookie mix engineers stuck and how to avoid it. This could be a game changer for your mixes, so get ready. By the way, the song I'm showing you today is a brand new song from my band Stare Down. You can mix this song right now inside my VIP membership. Find out how to try out VIP for free over at homestudiocorner.com/VIP. The first mistake people fall into is mixing by numbers. It's a honest mistake. I understand where you're coming from. It would be nice if you could just enter a bunch of numbers into all the settings in your software and wha-bam, you've got an amazing mix. But of course, we all know deep in our heart of hearts that doesn't happen. So you'll see comments like this. Always mix all your tracks to minus 18 decibels and then go from there. Or never EQ more than 3 decibels or never compress more than 3 decibels. The problem is these are all maybe rules of thumb, and there may be an element of helpful advice there. But when people are new to something like mixing, they tend to latch on to anything to give them like a sense of control and confidence. So if you hear someone say, don't EQ more than 3 decibels, you latch on to that. And then even if you're listening and you think this sounds terrible, a part of you says, well, that guy on YouTube said not to EQ more than 3 dB, so I guess I just have to live with this. Do you see the problem? We're so desperate for something that's not arbitrary or subjective. We want an objective thing, like set the level to this number. And that would be great if it worked, but it doesn't. Let me give you an example. Here is my EQ on my lead vocal. This is the last plugin in my vocal chain on this song. This looks ridiculous. Look at these huge cuts here. If I were following some rule, then these cuts would not exist. They're too much. They're too dramatic. Guess what? This is exactly what the vocal needed. Partially because I added some distortion earlier, which emphasized some of these kind of ringing frequencies that were already present in my voice. That's beside the point. The point is, obviously, let's do what sounds best, and that means we can't really go by numbers. We have to take the numbers into account, but ultimately use our ears and learn how to hear things and how to discern what sounds right. Mistake number 2 is de-emphasizing the importance of level. I call this yeah syndrome, because you'll tell this to people and they'll say, yeah, sure, but show me the cool stuff with the plugins. I've done over 1,000 critiques, one at a time, individual private critiques of people's mixes for people over the last 16 years of running Home Studio Corner. And you want to know the most common mistake that I hear? It's not EQ problems, it's not compression problems, it's not automation problems, it's not effects and reverbs and delay problems, it's volume problems. The basic levels of your tracks, the static mix, where you put the faders, that's the biggest mistake people make, especially early on in their journey. And it makes sense. If you've never mixed before, you've never really paid attention to where the drums sit in relation to the guitars. Let me give you an example of the kind of mixes I'll hear from people who are just getting started with mixing. If I had to do it again, So in that example, the drums are almost inaudible, the bass is pretty loud, the lead vocal's kind of buried, the harmonies are louder than the lead vocal, and the guitars are pretty present. I'm not saying this to make fun of anyone, it's just when you are learning how to mix, you think you're going to learn how to use things like EQ and compression, and you are, but the first thing you got to learn is, how am I going to set these levels? Do these levels make sense? Can I hear... Does it make sense for the drums to be way quieter than everything else? No, that doesn't make sense. So go listen to some of your favorite music and then come back and try to match that just with the faders. If you spent an hour just setting volumes and resetting them until it feels really good to you, you'll be shocked how much better your mix is going to turn out. Mistake number 3, de-emphasizing the power of EQ. EQ isn't sexy. It's just a tool for shaping frequencies. Kind of a snooze fest. Compression, on the other hand, compression, right? But EQ is at the heart of every good mix. You're setting your levels, and then you're balancing all those frequencies that are out of whack, because that's the nature of sound. We're trying to get them to be more balanced, but when you just get the levels right, there are all kinds of frequencies that aren't being nice. Here's an example. There are a pair of guitars that come in and play this little melodic line during the second verse of this song. And I noticed late in my mix, oh, they're a little bit quiet. So I turned them up. And while that sounded good, there was a little bit of thickness to them that I didn't hear before because they were too quiet. Now that they're at the right level, the thickness became a little more apparent. So I just grabbed an EQ and just took out this stuff right here. Just a little too thick. By pulling that down, it sounded like this versus this. It's fairly subtle, but there was like a foom, foom, foom that I felt when those parts came in. I felt the mix go foom, 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 foom. So I just turned that one thing down with EQ, and we're good to go. I didn't go crazy with compression or distortion or parallel processing or mid-side. It just a simple EQ was all it needed. Mistake number 4, overemphasizing the importance of compression. Compression is amazing. I love compression. There are some sounds you can't get without compression. Vocals and drums, for example. I can't get the vocal tone I like or the drum sound I want, at least in like rock music, without compression. Part of that sound is the sound of compression. So I'm not bashing compression. I love it. The problem is people tend to see that people use compression, and then they tend to put compression on everything. It's like hot sauce. You don't need to make it like hot sauce. Be a lot more conservative with where you're placing compression. You might compress aggressively, that's fine, but putting it on everything is a recipe for overdoing it. Let me just show you. In this mix, I've got a compressor here on my drum bus. Let me see if I have a compressor on the snare. I do not. So there's only compressor on my drums is on the drum bus, and I've got this tri-comp on this ribbon mic that was in the middle of the kit. That's it. Bass has no compression. Electric guitars have nothing on them on the bus. Individual guitars don't have any compression. I think the only one I compressed was maybe one pair of guitars that needed a little extra presence because they weren't popping quite as much. The vocal has compression, of course. The harmony vocals have compression as well. And then I've got a compressor on my mix bus. But if you look, you don't see, some people will literally go put compressors on every channel and then compress every channel and then wonder why things sound so chaotic and out of control. You just don't need it. And finally, mistake number 5, going too complex too soon. If you're new to mixing, and there's nothing wrong with saying I'm new to mixing, but what I mean is if you've only mixed a handful of songs, or maybe you've never mixed a song, and you don't feel super confident in your ability to mix, you wouldn't say your mixes are great yet, that's fine. I'm here to help you with that. But the advice I would give to you is you need to use as few plugins as possible. You don't need 8 plugins in your vocal chain. Not yet. I'm not saying 8 plugins in a vocal chain is bad. If you see a professional using 8 plugins, you might think, then I must use them. But until you have a deep understanding of what each of those plugins is doing and how each plugin adds complexity and creates new problems, then you're better off using as few plugins as possible. Every plugin I add to my vocal chain, it usually solves one problem and then creates 2 more. So I've got to then solve those other additional problems. That's something you absolutely can learn, but in the beginning, it makes more sense to maybe just stick to no plugins if you can do it, and then EQ only if you can get away with it, and then compression only when it's absolutely necessary and you know what that compressor is doing to the sound. A lot of people don't know what it's doing. They just throw it on there and hope for the best. Not a great approach, and you won't get better that way. This seems counterintuitive. There are all sorts of amazing plugins out there, and absolutely you should get them and buy them and own them and enjoy them. But I tend to have this sense of you got to earn that complexity. If you go too complex too soon, you're like a guitar player who wants to learn how to play like fully diminished 7 chords, but he really hasn't nailed the G chord yet. You're getting ahead of yourself. Or the guitar player with gobs of guitar pedals, but he still doesn't know how to get just a good basic guitar tone. All those pedals are messing him up and not helping him. He'd be better off with his guitar plugged straight into an amp until he can get a good tone, and then slowly add pedals only as needed. All right, that's it for this video. Leave a comment below. Which of these mistakes do you feel like you're making and you want to make a shift? I'd love to hear from you. And also, if you haven't seen this video on a bunch of mixing tips, be sure to watch that next. Thanks for watching. See ya.